And with us this evening are the winners of the 99th Pulitzer Prize. Thank you for being here. As you know, the Pulitzer Prizes in the journalism school sort of have our twins. We have a common history, we have a common benefactor. Our founder, Joseph Pulitzer, endowed the school and also endowed the prizes. And we've had a long, lasting, and fruitful relationship together. I'm very pleased tonight to celebrate this year's winners of the Pulitzer Prizes and to present their stories to you. I will start off with each by going from my left to the right, to my left to the extreme left, I'm sorry. And I will start off by describing each of the prize-winning stories and then asking each of the winners or each of the team of winners some questions, after which I will open each story up to questions from the floor. Then at the very end, we will have one big Q&A that will allow you to ask questions about anything from these stories. But we will limit each of the short Q&As to stories to questions related to the story that we had just discussed. All right. So I am very pleased to start off with this story. Let me show you this picture. This is the Central Valley, home to California's most productive agricultural land. This area is Diana Marcum's beat for the Los Angeles Times. Last year, Diana reported on 6 communities there that are struggling under conditions of extreme drought. She brought this epic event to life in a series of remarkable portraits that are a modern retelling of the stories we often associate with the chroniclers of California's past. Diana's stories evoke the novelist John Steinbeck and the photographer Dorothea Lange. Here, under cloudless skies, town wells have cracked. Pipes spit mud and yellow water. Taps go dry. People joke that they grow dirt. Their hardships remind them of the Dust Bowl, a period of severe drought in the 1930s, when the unanchored soil turned to dust, which the winds blew away in huge clouds that blackened the sky. Diana's stories paint pictures of already hard lives made worse by the drought. She captured workers in the fields, in their homes, and on Main Street. This is James Turner, a 91-year-old black farmer. He is the son of sharecroppers who moved from Oklahoma to the Central Valley in the 1920s. Here is how Diana described him. He was only 3 when he moved here, but he still has an accent thick as butter on cornbread, like many of those raised in the Central Valley. He bought the farm the year he married and paid off the land in 7 years. He didn't believe in owing money. Growing cotton and alfalfa on the 20 acres didn't feed 5 children, so he worked construction and grew grapes and fruit trees. In April 2014, Turner's wells went dry. He paid $400 to have water trucked in every few weeks. By July, Turner decided to stop watering. No new wells could be drilled. His well driller said he had a waiting list so long, Turner had to wait till December for a new well. His neighbor opened to fill Turner's tank every other week, but that water was only good for necessities. California has a vast system of buying, selling, pumping, and moving trillions of gallons of water to farms in the Central Valley. For the first time in the more than half a century that the federal government has been diverting water to farmers, there were no deliveries to most Central Valley water irrigation districts. As the drought enters its fourth year, there simply isn't enough water to go around. Throughout the Central Valley, Diana found heartbreaking stories. She spoke to women in communities whose residents struggled to pay for water using Social Security checks and babysitting money. She found farm workers who emptied the towns they lived in as their jobs had disappeared and they were forced to find work elsewhere. The ones who remained, like Hector Ramirez in the photo here, were lucky to find work 1 or 2 days a week. The pay, $8.50 an hour. Diana's stories are also stories of resilience and tenacity. Donna Johnson, a resident of the town of East Porterville, decided to find out how many other residents of her town were out of water. She figured that while she was at it, she would bring them water as well. The local paper ran an article that gave her phone number and address and said she was collecting bottled water for drought victims. The next day, there were pallets of plastic bottles at her door. Donna worked out a delivery system, but she could barely cope with the demand. For her lyrical and searing portraits of Californians in the time of drought, Diana Marcum was awarded the 2015 Pulitzer Prize for feature writing. Congratulations, Diana.
Thank you.
So let me start by asking you a few questions. First of all, how was this story born? How was it conceptualized? How did you choose which individuals and which communities to focus on?
Well, the short answer to how we conceptualized it is we didn't. I mean, it wasn't one of those things that we could preconceive because it was still unfolding. When we first started reporting these stories, it was about a year before the California drought became the California drought with capital letters, and everyone, felt it. At that point, it was still really off in the isolated areas. If you were in the cities, you could go on with your life and maybe notice there wasn't as much snow on the mountains, but it wasn't, it wasn't in your face like it would become. At that point, we'd had like 17% of normal snowfall, which was just shocking, but now we're at 0%. They couldn't even measure well, we've got a little snow now, but last year they couldn't even measure the snow. So it wasn't one of those things where we knew what we'd find ahead of time. And we kind of just winged it, We got in our car and we drove around and we started talking to people. The first story, I picked Huron. I could have picked any West Side town. When we say the West Side in the Central Valley, it's this vast agricultural area where it's hard to even find human beings. The scale is huge. If you see people, they're huddles of color of farm workers way out in the field or people on huge farm equipment. It's not a human scale kind of a place, but there's these little towns out there, mostly with migrant farm workers and a lot of people that don't have legal standing, so you have to be very, sensitive to that. And I just randomly picked Huron. And we started talking to people, and we got different stories because water in California is something that can be bought and sold and moved. So some people were making tons of money in the drought, and they still had plenty of work. So you talk to the first people, no problems, we've got work, nothing's changed. And it was almost checkerboard. You had to keep going back and forth. So we were looking for that person, and we were going over an overpass, and I saw these two guys in a field, just two little human figures. And the photographer who took all these amazing pictures is Michael Robinson Chavez. I said, Michael, there's two guys down there, so we got off the overpass, went down the dirt road, went down, and we met Francisco. And with every single story in here, there's always a moment where I get like kind of a feeling on the back of my neck, and I think, yes, you're the one. This has got to be it. And then later on, in the reporting, there's that point where I go, oh no, I made a huge mistake. What did I do? And it's too late. But this was the moment where I was like, Michael, this is the guy. As soon as he said that about the hoeing, they made the joke about trying to get a week more work. I was like, I could almost see the lead before I'd reported the story. Like, this is our guy. But it was hard because he didn't have a phone, he lived far out, we'd make these trips and not talk to him that time. But that gave us a lot of, I think, richness, because then we're just roaming around the town and seeing other things. But that's how it starts, and each and every story had some kind of weird serendipity about how I found them, how they happened to be the ones. And I think back now and I think about all the other people it could have been, so many other people we met along the way.
Well, how much time did you devote to reporting each of these stories? How often did you go back to them? Did you wait until something happened to these characters before you reported them?
No, and I don't know how to answer that because, so much of the time is the looking. And Michael's driving from LA and I'm driving from Fresno. And remember, these are rural areas, so it's not like you can just swing by on your way home or something. We would usually go out for 2 or 3 days looking. And almost always on the first trip we found someone that we kind of agreed on. We sort of did that brother-sister thing where I get one call, you get the next one, I get the one call, like Francisco was mine, so then he picked Fred. And because he wasn't happy with my choice of Francisco because, I mean, he was in the end, but Francisco's Oaxacan, and he's very stoic. You know, they don't, he doesn't have a lot of facial expressions. So Michael said it was, you know, Francisco happy, Francisco sad. He's like, so he wanted somebody much more emotive the next time round. So we'd go out, and with Francisco it was really hard because, you know, it was just if he was home, if we could find him, if he had work. So I think we made contact maybe 3 times. You know, we just had to work with what we could get. It wasn't always as much as I wanted it to be.
So you said something about, you know, the hair at the back of your neck standing up. But what were you looking for as you went around driving? I mean, what kinds of stories did you want to tell? What would these stories represent? What is the larger story that?
Okay, so the largest story that I was telling long before drought is the story of the Central Valley. You know, this landscape and this struggle of people that are trying to eke out a living out there. And we've got poverty, and we have immigration, and we have all of the water issues were there even before the drought. So I was kind of continuing a story I'd been telling all along. But in this case, I was looking for the most vulnerable. I was looking for the people who were truly feeling the effects instead of people that were, you know, there was a lot of political maneuvering going on, and I wanted to get away and beyond all that and just get to the real personal stories. And what I look for, I can't quite explain it, but I look for something that moves me or captures me, because I figure if I feel something, then that gives me something to pass on.
You talk about looking for some of the most vulnerable people and the people most affected by the drought, and very often those are the most difficult people to interview and ask difficult questions of, because these are proud, self-sufficient people, and you're asking them to talk about their vulnerabilities. And how did you go about making them feel at ease and telling you the stories of their lives, the interesting stories that you featured here?
You know, I don't ask a lot of questions for a journalist. I'm a person that just kind of hangs out and watches and I like to let the conversation go where it will. I want people to tell their own story instead of me directing it so much. And we do spend time. Like, I'm saying we didn't have months, but you know, when we're there on a 3-day trip and we're in your kitchen, you're hanging out and the kids are running around, there's time to just kind of see what people say to each other. Like, my stories usually have a lot more of people talking to each other and just going about their lives instead of me grilling them. And then people always ask me, how did you ask them that? But with the sensitive things, but the sensitive questions aren't the ones I ask. I would never ask somebody, you know, was your wife sad when she told you she was pregnant? Because I wouldn't know to ask that. I'm not going to ask somebody, did you ever suffer racism so stinging that you wanted to kill a man? I mean, how would I come up with that question? Those things come out in conversation. The hard questions to ask, and I think probably every journalist here probably knows, is, what's your last name? How do you spell it? Because that's when, no, seriously, that's when it shifts. You know, you've got this nice kind of vibe going on, you're talking, it's human to human, but then you say, what's your last name and how do you spell it? And especially the area that I cover, you know, that's a loaded question. And I think even when it's somebody that has legal standing, it's still that tip-off that, oh, okay, this is official, this is real, we're not just shooting the breeze, you know. That's a hard question. Where you're from is a really hard question. That's, again, a question that can be really loaded, and you have to be careful, you know, how you ask it, because if you ask it the wrong way, it sounds like, do you have a right to be here, especially when you're working in farm worker towns.
Why do these people talk to you?
I think they're trying to be of service to other people that are going through the same thing. You know, we explain to them, look, we can be your conduit. I mean, I don't use that word, but, you know, talk to us and we can let other people know. You know, because they don't have a way, really. I mean, a lot of these towns don't even have local government. I mean, a lot of times they're really unaware of what the Los Angeles Times is. You know, I have to say, it's this paper, a lot of people in California read it. You know, people that make decisions for other people like you might read your story, it might help. So I think they're doing it not because I have some sort of, you know, reporter whispering capabilities to get people to talk to me, but because they know that it's important, and if they don't talk, then so many people like them. Their story won't be known either.
One of the stories that I liked there was the stories of these two neighbors.
Yeah.
Turner, this guy, Turner, and his Sikh or Indian neighbor.
Yeah, talk about getting hard to talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. How did you stumble upon them, and how did you report their story?
Okay, so by now, you know, this is a little bit farther in the series, and the drought is going, and now we know what we're doing. Michael decided to shoot black and white from the very beginning so that we didn't have to tell anybody it was a series or a project, but you could look at it and see they went together. But this is the last one, so by now, you know, I've been here and there, and now it's getting narrow because I know I want to go to the north, and I know that I need to deal with this well problem because it's getting really bad. Everybody's wells are going dry. When, like, somebody with more money will dig a deeper well, and the person across the street will run out of, you know, water. And it's really, I thought I was going to be writing a very angry, confrontational story. So the fact that I got to write this amazingly sweet, sharing story was a total surprise to me, and we didn't know it till near the end of the story.
You should tell the story, because some of them may not have read it.
Okay, so, well, I'll go back how I meet them. So when I'm looking for people, I'll tell everyone, you know, my neighbors, my post lady, hey, if you know somebody, great. So one of my neighbors is a photographer for the local paper, and he went out to take a picture for, is it Veterans Day that's in November? He went out to take a picture for the local paper. They'd gotten a bunch of veterans, and they were going to take their picture and give a few quotes. And he came back and said, James Turner was one of them, who's one of the main characters in this story. He said, he has a tank, he's running out of water, but beyond that, oh my goodness, he's such a curmudgeon. You are going to love this guy, you know, because I just love people with big personalities. So he says, I don't know if he'll talk to you, but maybe if you catch him on a good day, you know. So I call him up, and he sounds great. I mean, he sounds like, you know, he's running out of water. He's in an area where a lot of almonds are going in, which is a big issue. So we're going to go out there, and he says, well, maybe, I have a cold, I don't know, come talk. So Michael drives all the way up to LA, we get there, and oh, no, James wasn't having anything to do with this, nothing, you know, he had a cold, he didn't feel like talking, we were saying, it's okay, you know, we have a good immune system. He's like, I'm gonna make you sick. Oh no, we're very healthy, you know, come on out. And he's like through the screen door, and I can't even see him, and I think there really are journalism gods, and they bestow great gifts, because since he wouldn't talk to us, we went just randomly driving around, and we went next door. And during his spiel, he had been saying, when I talked to him on the phone, he'd said the guy across the street put in a well, and I ran out of water, and when we got there and he had a cold, he said that the reason he had a cold was the neighbor across the street had taken him to Home Depot and had kept him up late, and you know, he doesn't like to stay up late, and that's why he had a cold, and it was just because this guy wanted to use his discount. You know, I got the feeling he didn't like the neighbor. So we go to the neighbors, and they're this Sikh family, and they just happen to be out, and we start talking to them, and then I find out that he's giving him water. So I said, well, he won't talk to us. Since he's a friend of yours, you know, maybe you could take us over and introduce us. So we all go trooping over there. Me, the photographer, the farmer's son, a random neighbor who was a beekeeper across the street who decided to come along. So we have this whole little entourage. We go to James' store again, and he won't open the door, but he starts, you know, chiding the farmer, like, you know, the reason I have this cold is you kept me up too late. And the guy's looking down, and he's trying to hide a smile, and I can see in that moment how much affection he has for him. Like, he's just so amused. So I'm like, oh, there's a relationship here. And then that's how the story developed.
It's a fantastic story. It's about how his neighbor, who originally stole his water, was giving him water when the drought came. So it's one.
It was a surprise.
Yes. Yeah. So there are a lot of. You should read the series. There's a lot of surprising little vignettes like this, like the Yemeni store owner.
Yeah, don't be afraid of them. You know, they're always described as, you know, harsh and sad and heartbreaking, but they're actually kind of funny too, I think. I mean, the people are just great.
I'd like to give our audience here a chance to ask questions. Do we have a microphone by any chance in there? There is, yeah. So does anyone have questions for Diana? We have a mic coming up just in time for you. Please.
My question is,
I think you do. Do we need a microphone?
Yeah.
Yes, because we are recording and filming this. Yeah.
my question is, and I think I'll probably have it for each of the panelists, how often or were you able to go back and speak to your subjects after the stories were written? Have you had any contact with them since the stories have been written?
I leave it to them, especially since a lot of my stories, there's an impact. You know, people start trying, you know, they're moved and they give them things, and I don't want them to think that I'm asking for a thank you. So I don't go to them. If they get in touch with me, you know, then we can continue the relationship. Now, James was the exception. I have tried to call him a couple times. He's not talking to me. I called him cantankerous. I haven't had time to drive out there, but I know he really misses his oranges, so I kind of have this plan that I'm going to take him a big bag of oranges around Christmas and see if maybe, you know, in person he softens up, so I'm hoping I get to talk to him again.
Since it's such a, first of all, congratulations on the story.
Thank you.
I want to in such a long project, how did you first go about the process of pitching it? Because it wasn't a big thing at that time. So I mean, how did you go about getting convincing editors, getting the approvals, and to work on such a long project?
Okay, we really wanted to avoid all of that. We didn't want it to be something where you sat in an office. I mean, it depends what kind of project. I mean, right after this, I did a very heavy social media project with a lot of different parts, you know, and I went into the meeting with 14 people and pitched it and did all of that. But this felt different, you know, it really did feel, you know, it was just between Michael and me. We decided on this particular set we wanted to be really old school, you know, that it was just simple storytelling, it was photos, and so we didn't have to really round up a lot of outside support. His editor knew, my editor knew, and since I'm the Central Valley person and I assign Central Valley stories, I assigned them to myself. I mean, they were just another story, right? Well, I don't assign them. I mean, I have an editor, but I say, oh, I'm going to go work on this.
But you knew from the beginning you were going to do a series of portraits? No, it just happened.
We kind of had a notion, but we didn't have a pre-approved plan where we went to people and pitched it and said, we're going to do this huge stories with X amount of, you know, it's going to have this many stories and it's going to have, you know, video and audio, and, you know, we did one story and then we saw where that story took us, and then we waited for months because it doesn't rain in California in the summer. And we had to wait and see if it rained, you know, so during the summer we just waited for the rainy season again, and then it didn't rain. And then we knew that was the tipping point, and then we just really pushed on.
Yes, please.
Yes, I was curious if different communities in the Valley responded to you differently, migrant communities, you know, different backgrounds. You mentioned Yemenis, I'm thinking Modesto. I mean, were there different...
You're from the Central Valley?
I'm from Davis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I was just curious if different communities responded to your questioning differently, and if so, how did you deal with that?
No, I find all communities are the same. I find all people, if you just really are there and you tell somebody why you're there and you listen, they'll talk. It's a little bit harder with, say, the Oaxacan or the farther south, you know, because they're more likely to have worries about being deported. It's California, so I think whenever there's a community that has immigration problems, it's a little bit harder, and it takes another day or two for people to realize, you know, we're journalists, we're there to tell your story, and we don't care, you know, if you work under 2 or 3 different names. It helped a lot, our backgrounds, I think, in that I'm in the Central Valley, so I kind of know the rhythms and how people talk, and, you know to slow down and just kind of, you know, stand back a little bit, be a little Central Valley about it. You know, that farmer thing, you just kind of nod. And you know, you don't go in pelting people with questions. You don't march in and say, I'm the Los Angeles Times. You just, you know, let them get used to you being around, hang out at the cafe, hang out at the liquor store. So that helps. And then Michael had been, he was a war correspondent. He'd spent a lot of time in the Middle East. So that helped a lot because, you know, he was familiar with places that they had lived. Whenever you can say, oh, I've been in your town, you know, especially if it's Yemen or, you know, somewhere far away, that, and the Sikh family, you know, the fact that he had been to the area where they were from, that was a real connection. Did that answer your question?
I think it did. So, quick question before we move on. Yes?
Sort of a follow-up, how do you go about taking notes and capturing scenes, especially when, you know, they're not very familiar with journalists and your job? If you could describe your process.
Yeah, I'm the worst. My notebooks will be filled with things that don't go in the story because I think the moments that really belong in the story, I don't need to write down. But then I'll go looking for that scene to see if there's something I don't remember or I need. Like there's one scene with Francisco where the missionaries are there and he's hanging his head, you know, and they're making the little girl pray. And I become entranced and I'm listening and I'm watching and I forget to write anything down. So my notebook tends to be my head, especially if I'm connecting with people. I mean, the minute you go like that, it reminds them and yourself, it puts kind of distance between you. And I guess when I try to do it, I try to never write about them. I try to write about us. You know, I try to think of it from their point of view. And when we're there, we're part of that community, or at least we're trying to be for a little while, as opposed to, sorry, you know, this. I've seen people like try to talk to people like this, and that doesn't work.
And then do you go back home and type out everything?
Oh, I'll be in the car and I'll be like, Michael, don't talk to me. I need to remember this, you know, or I'll be like, kind of like somebody will say the perfect quote, but I won't want to ruin that moment. So I'll just, you know, be saying it like a mantra in the back of my head till we can get to the car and I write it down.
That's great.
I've tried taping, but that doesn't work. It really makes it awkward.
Well, thank you, Diana.
Thank you.